So I grew up in the Air Force. I was a military kid. I was born in Newark, Delaware. I only lived there for about 6 months, so can't say I really remember much of it. Spent most of my childhood moving around. We lived in a couple different states: Maryland, Virginia, Alabama, California, Montana, Ohio, and then back to Montana. We spent a little bit of time in Turkey as well, overseas. My dad was stationed there, and we were able to go over and spend some time on Incirlik Air Base for about 3 months, so that was a pretty cool experience. That was when we were living in Alabama. I went to MSU Bozeman. I graduated high school here in Great Falls. I went to CMR class of 2005. Ended up going down to MSU Bozeman. Took me a while to get my bachelor's degree. I had maybe more fun than I spent time studying, but I ended up graduating with a degree in political science with a focus on international relations. I took a couple political-oriented classes while I was in school, but mostly my focus was on international affairs. I studied a couple languages, Japanese, Arabic, Spanish, German. My Spanish is okay, my German less so. My Arabic and Japanese, unfortunately, I've forgotten all but the most basic of phrases. Ended up working for Albertsons, the Bozeman store, all through college. I was there for quite some time. After I graduated in 2013, I ended up going to the Belgrade store, transferring over there. They put me on kind of a management corporate track, and I spent a couple years there. Ultimately, my wife ended up getting a teaching job here in Great Falls. We still had family here. She's from here. She was born here. I still had, my parents were living here in town. And we moved back in 2016. I transferred to the 10th Avenue store. It was really convenient, great people to work with. And I was at that store for about a year before I started working for the Cascade County Planning Department. I was with the County Planning Department for a little under 4 years, and I began working for my current employer, which is Morris Land Surveys, back in 2021. And I've been there for just over 3 years. So been a good experience. Our main office is in Choteau. We have a branch office here in Great Falls that I kind of split my time between the two offices. As far as political background goes, don't really have much of one. I worked on a campaign in 2014 for one of my professors down at MSU Bozeman, Frankie Wilmer. She was a state senator at one point in time, and unfortunately she lost her re-election bid. And then I volunteered a bit on Rob Quist's campaign in 2016. And then just kind of stopped being quite as active politically for a couple years after that. And honestly, never thought that I would run for office. It's one of those things that just kind of struck me almost on a whim. But kind of through my employer, we were advocating for specific pieces of legislation. I was watching what was going on in the committee hearings and in the floor sessions, and kind of thought that, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do a better job than my current representative, and figured I should put my money where my mouth is, so to speak, and actually step up and see if I could make that happen. So that's kind of how I got to where I'm at today.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question. Why are you running for public office? And that kind of explains it, I guess.
Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with the way that the legislature handled themselves in the 23 session. I was frustrated with my representative. Like I said, I thought I could do a better job, so I thought I'd take a stab at it. I didn't feel I was being adequately represented. I know the property tax issue is one that's hit home for me as well. And I was just overall underwhelmed by what came out of the legislative session. And I'm sure I'm going to get some pushback and upset a few people by saying that, but that's how I feel. So. The actual registration process to get into the ballot is pretty easy, very simple, much more so than I expected. It's everything else that takes all of your time and effort and will.
Okay. Yeah, so what issue or issues do you feel are of most importance as this next legislative session gets ready to convene in January?
Sure. I would say the biggest one that I'm hearing on the doors is people are talking about property taxes, they're talking about inflation, and I'm finding a lot of people who are really concerned about the affordability of housing here in Montana and the affordability of real estate. We've had a lot of people moving into our state over the last couple of years. It's one of the fastest growing states in the United States, and I think everybody's feeling it, and people who have been here the longest are feeling it the most. I can't say I've spent my entire life in Montana, but I've spent most of my life in Montana. and I consider this my home. The Air Force moved me around. They kind of gave me the opportunity to choose my home, and I picked here, and so did my wife, and so did the rest of my family, and so that's why we chose to stay here. When I'm visiting people on the doors, I'm hearing concerns about property taxes, affordable housing. I'm finding people who have young adult children who are in their late teens or early 20s who are still living at home because they can't afford to move out. I considered my background in land use planning and my experience administering subdivision regulations, floodplain regulations, zoning regulations, all that fun, boring stuff that's surprisingly important that nobody wants to pay attention to. I have a lot of experience with that and thought, you know, maybe I'm the guy that has the right knowledge to actually make a difference. So part of the reason that I decided to go for it.
Okay. Well, on the property tax issue, you're right, that seems to be the concern on many people's list. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on providing property tax relief while still maintaining enough money for essential services?
Of course. So one of the issues that's come up is a lot of essential services are provided by the counties. And there's something of a false equivalency, I think, between county taxation and county spending are not necessarily the same thing. Counties and cities, municipalities, they get funding from grants, they get funding from the federal government, from the states. Not all of that comes directly from property taxes. Property taxes in some counties it's a scale, right? So some counties are more reliant on property taxes, some counties are less reliant on property taxes. Sometimes infrastructure projects, there's grant money for that. That goes into the county coffers from grant money, federal or state level, that is then applied to these projects that people need. Bridges, roads, water, sewer, all that fun stuff that, again, a little bit boring, but we wouldn't get very far without it. What seems to have happened, and I think there's pretty substantial data to back this up, is that a lot of larger corporations, utility companies with centrally assessed properties were given tax breaks in this last legislative session, while residential property owners saw their tax rates go up. The legislature is typically responsible for administering the amount of, the legislature creates the rules for taxation, the county then apply those rules to the people within their jurisdiction. And of course, there's still some taxes that go to the state, but what ended up happening is residential taxes went up faster than centrally assessed taxes and commercial and industrial taxes. And I think we need to balance that back out. I think the people of Montana are ready to have that balance back out, and they've seen what happens when the legislature doesn't do their duty and allows taxes to go up without any sort of mitigation or remediation.
Okay. So how would you prioritize allocating money when the state has a budget surplus, as it does now?
So one of the things I'm interested in funding more adequately is healthcare. I'm in favor of Medicare expansion. I am also in favor of providing more public services for mental health services. I think prevention and soft services like rehabilitation facilities, drug treatment, even just basic mental health services for people who are maybe struggling with issues in their personal lives should be made more accessible and I think destigmatized in the state of Montana so that people don't feel ashamed to go get those services and to request them. I think preventative care is worth more than, I suppose you could say, reactionary care when we're treating a problem after it's manifested rather than before it's manifested and finding ways to prevent that.
And what would you do to improve bipartisanship?
Well, I consider myself to be at least a somewhat decent negotiator. I've always considered myself to be center, left of center, somebody who has friends on both sides of the aisle. I work up in Choteau. It's a very rural, very conservative area. Many of my coworkers are very rural and conservative individuals, and I am exposed to that perspective every day of the week. I'm also exposed to the perspective of people who live here in Great Falls and are more liberal, more progressive, shall we say, and their priorities are different. But what you find the more time you spend talking to people is most people agree on 90% of the issues. It's that 10% that really turns into a sticking point and everybody focuses on, and everybody turns politics into this football that they kick back and forth without really accomplishing anything, while people are just bickering over a couple wedge issues that really aren't that important in the grand scheme of things. So I want to bring civility, I want to bring compromise, and I want to bring working relationships to the Montana legislature. I know people all across the state, I've worked with people all across the state, and I would like to think that I have the appropriate perspective to bring to the legislature and do something productive and make a difference, and if not, at least maybe help somebody with more influence than me do something productive and make a difference.
Excellent. Anything else that you can add?
I don't necessarily think so. I suppose I could talk for a while on any particular issue that you'd like to visit more on. My forte is really land use planning, land use development. I've came from something of a blue collar background. Yeah, I graduated from college, but I spent a lot of time working in grocery stores, and I'll say my job was logistics and distribution management, and sure, I spent time writing orders and managing our inventory, but I spent a lot of time stocking shelves and running check stands too. So I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. Like I said, my wife was a teacher. Teachers aren't paid super well in the state, unfortunately. That's something I'd also like to address. And we've learned to live within our means. And I'd like to bring that to the Montana legislature. She's started a small business. I work for a small business. I consider myself a salt of the earth person, and I'm just trying to be real with everybody. And I'm trying to be real with the people that I talk to and not put on a charade, put on a show, and try and pretend to be somebody that I'm not in order to get elected or just to say whatever people want to hear. In order to earn somebody's vote. I've talked to plenty of people. I don't see eye to eye on every single issue with them, but I've had people tell me that they'll vote for me because we agree on certain issues, even though we don't agree on all issues. Frankly, even within the party framework that we have here in Montana and nationally, I don't think it's necessarily healthy that everybody is expected to toe one particular line and agree on every single issue. I don't think that's good for discourse, and I don't think that's good for our country, and I think that's kind of how we've gotten to the point where we're at, where a lot of people are just so polarized that we've lost sight of the middle ground that, most of us just want to be able to put food on our table, keep a roof over our heads, take care of our loved ones, and not fight nonsensical culture wars over things that really aren't even that important.